Hello and welcome. My name is Jared Ortiz. I teach Catholic theology at Hope College, and I'm the executive director of the Saint Benedict Institute. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. The Saint Benedict Institute and the Collegium Institute are delighted to present On the Making of Books, Crafting Catholic Literature for the 21st Century. And we'd like to thank all of our co-sponsors for this event: the Corpus Christi Foundation, Ignatius Press, Dappled Things, Wise Blood Books, Prism Press, Whitefire Publishing, the Hank Center for the Catholic Intellectual Heritage, the Portsmouth Institute for Faith and Culture, the St. Lawrence Catholic Campus Center at the University of Kansas, the Harvard Catholic Forum, and the brand new MFA at the University of St. Thomas, Houston. Thank you all for helping us out tonight. For tonight's event, we will be discussing the state of Catholic fiction with 4 Catholic authors and editors. That is, from people who write Catholic fiction, who read Catholic fiction, who edit Catholic fiction, and who work with a wide range of Catholic authors. To introduce our guests, I will now turn the event over to our moderator, Bernardo Aparicio, the founder and publisher of Dappled Things. Thank you, Bernardo.
Thank you, Jared. Can you hear me okay? I think so. Okay, so today, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And we have a fantastic panel of writers, editors, and publishers who are all connected to presses that are publishing books right now that are open to the Catholic imagination and who will surely have much insight to share on tonight's topic. I want to begin by briefly introducing them. First, we have Vivian Dudro, who is a senior editor at Ignatius Press. We have Joshua Wren, who is founder of Wise Blood Books and co-founder of the new Master in Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of St. Thomas, Houston. His books include This Our Exile and In the Wine Press, both of them short story collections, as well as How to Read and Write Like a Catholic, and the novel Infinite Regress, forthcoming in early 2022. Karen Ullo is the author of 2 award-winning novels, Jennifer the Damned and Cinder Alia, as well as a founding editor of Prism Press and former managing editor of Dappled Things. I like that Joshua Wren is also former managing editor of Dappled Things, so it seems if you want to start a press, you should be you should be a managing editor of Dappled Things. And finally, we have former college professor of literature and fiction writing, Suzanne Wolf, who is an editor of Slant Books and a novelist. Her award-winning novel, The Confessions of X, the story of St. Augustine's concubine, was published in 2016. Her latest novel, The Course of All Treasons, a murder mystery set in 1580s England, came out in 2020. She is currently writing the 3rd novel in the Elizabethan series. Okay, so to get into our conversation, I want to take us back to 2013 when Dana Gioia published The Catholic Writer Today. And there he states that although Roman Catholicism constitutes the largest religious and cultural group in the United States, Catholicism currently enjoys almost no positive presence in the American fine arts. But what is the situation of Catholic writers and Catholic literature 8 years later? Do we remain in a time of decline, or might it make sense to begin talking about revival? So to get us started on today's topic, I give you Vivian Dudro.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vivian Dudrow, senior editor at Ignatius Press. And thank you for joining us this evening. I'm happy to be here. As you just heard, we panelists were given as a prompt Dana Gioia's 2013 article, The Catholic Writer Today, which was published in First Things. That article described a decline in Catholic arts and letters, and he named some of the obstacles to writing and publishing Catholic novels in the 21st century. Many of his points correspond with our experience at Ignatius Press. And some of these will serve as my points of departure in talking about Catholic writing today. Father Joseph Fessio founded Ignatius Press in 1978 to publish English translations of works by his European mentors, namely Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI, Henri de Lubac, the French Jesuit scholar, and Hans von Balthasar, the Swiss Jesuit scholar. By the way, both de Lubac and von Balthasar were named as cardinals by Pope John Paul II. At least von Balthasar was Pope John Paul II anyway. He died before he could get the red beanie, however. Now, these works were theological, but they were written by highly educated, cultured men who appreciated the arts. And that was the founding of Ignatius Press. Hans von Balthasar, in fact, wrote an entire set of works on theological aesthetics called The Glory of the Lord. He believed that beauty is the way we apprehend goodness, and that when beauty leaves the room, truth follows after her. Does this not describe the 20th century? But out of the ashes rises the phoenix. And has it not been this dearth of beauty, goodness, and truth, this spiritual desert, if you will, that has caused a thirst for Catholic arts? And do we not see embers in those ashes? I think all of you here tonight are proof of that. Ignatius Press published its first novel in 1996, Father Elijah, written by the Canadian painter Michael O'Brien. I think in Michael O'Brien, we see embers of both visual arts and written arts. Both he and Ignatius Press were trailblazers in making spiritually rich fiction available through a theological publisher. During the next 25 years, we've published many more novels by O'Brien and others as well in multiple genres. And other presses and authors have emerged to fill what appears to be an increasing demand for Catholic fiction, including, I would like to add, young adult fiction. We have been receiving lately a number of novels in this category. The Spirit blows where it wills and when it wills. And I do believe it is blowing now, which is how I account for the amazing turnout for this event. Literature, like everything else, goes through cycles, and I'm happy indeed to be a part of this one, wherever it might be. Thank you, and I turn it over to Joshua.
Thank you so much, Vivian, and thank you again, everyone, for being in attendance with us this evening. This is pure joy to have yet another extension of an ongoing conversation. I want to begin by just prefacing my kind of state of contemporary Catholic letters by noting that I conceive of a Catholic understanding of literature broadly taken as existing between these kinds of two poles on a continuum. On the one hand, you have St. John Henry Newman, who is the first saint novelist, arguing that literature is largely a record of man in rebellion, and that you cannot possibly have a sinless literature that is written by sinful people. Newman's definition of literature focuses on all literature that's ever been written, from Homer to Shakespeare to contemporary novels of his day. And he focuses mainly on literature as a study of human nature. This is a sound starting point, or a good definition as far as it goes, but it surely doesn't take into consideration what Flannery O'Connor says when she describes her stories as being about the action of grace on characters who are not very willing to support it. In other words, her stories are stories of conversion, where grace is acting upon people, sometimes in ways that they experience as violent, but moving them towards ultimately the beatific vision. And her vision of human nature is one that does not end with a kind of natural virtue or natural happiness or natural vice, but rather, again, the beatific vision. And so I think it's well and good for Catholics to have conversations like the ones that we're having tonight, where we're looking at fiction written by Catholic authors. But it's very good and important for Catholics to study Homer, or to study Balzac, or to study the novels of Henry James, who problematizes the secular understanding of the self, even though he himself isn't writing from a position of faith. I also sort of take it for granted that there are writers like Willa Cather who are not Catholic, who are writing what we could describe as Catholic novels. And I also would like to gesture towards authors such as Gustave Flaubert, who described himself as a mystic at bottom who believes in nothing, even though he himself wrote A Simple Heart, which is a story that he meant to not be blasphemous or condescendingly ironic, that traces the simple faith of a young woman into her old and senile age. The first thing that I'd like to point to that is sort of noteworthy since 2012, when the Catholic Writer Today appeared on the scene, is Dana Joy's own collection of poems, Pity the Beautiful. Oftentimes when we talk about Dana Joy, we talk about the Catholic Writer Today, but it's important to note that he is also a poet and a Catholic poet. In a lot of his poetry, we see evidence of what Jean McClure in his book Partial Faiths describes as post-secular literature. This is stories that trace the turn of secular-minded characters back towards the religious. So the signature of these narratives is a kind of religiously inflected disruption of secular constructions of the real. And so, for example, in the poem The Angel with the Broken Wing, we see a statue of an angel whose wing was broken in a left-wing revolution in Latin America. And so there was the revolutionaries themselves experienced the presence of this transcendent angel as being something that they need to destroy because it intimidates them. And then the angel is put into an art museum where the staff is willing to praise the sort of aesthetic elegance and beauty of this angel, but they find the things that it signifies, namely the faith of the people who would have prayed before that statue, to be too fierce. And so they lock, in Dana Joy's words, faith's ardor in an air-conditioned tomb. I'd also like to point to a novel that appeared around that same time, What Happened to Sophie Wilder, by the editor of Harper's, Christopher Beha, who was raised Catholic, left his faith, and then reverted. And in the novel What Happened to Sophie Wilder, we have really one of the most remarkable conversion scenes since The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. And here we have, right, a description of a woman who attends Mass, and then I'm quoting, something came over her. It got closer to say that she was, for a time, occupied. And so she's so shocked by the grace that she feels, Beha writes, that she felt on that day everything had changed. The novel goes on to explore the love affair between Sophie, who experiences a deep conversion, and Charlie Blakeman. And he sees in her a kind of mainly someone who he's in love with, but the way that the central intelligence of the novel registers the events is that Sophie's conversion is that by which everything else is measured. The presence of God is represented as real, not just a psychological projection or a trace in some sort of whispery or small way. And the novel contains also one of the most Dostoevskian dialogues in contemporary fiction, where Sophie's husband's father, who Sophie's husband is estranged with, Sophie goes to take care of him in his dying days, and he complains that God is a tyrant. He's a totalitarian who has to control everything. He reads your mail, he bugs your phone, he watches you while you take a shit. I don't see what's to admire, this character says. Death camps, you get sent there for the same reason, incidentally. for not being a Christian. And Sophie, right, says that, that these are broad strokes, that he's oversimplifying, and she gives a rejoinder that he's not spying in some sort of prurient way, but these doubts seem to wear away at her, and she helps hasten his death by over-medication, and she then chooses that she herself cannot be forgiven, and so she, in a sense, authors her own permanent damnation. But we can't help by the end of the novel, even though she damns herself, right? We can't help by the end of that novel feel that damnation as tragic, right? So Beha's central intelligence points us back to that transcendence. There are a number of other works that I could point to. I'll mention them mainly as the conversation goes on. But they range from some spiritual memoirs that are written in a literary key, Abigail Favala's Into the Deep and Sohrab Ahmari's From Fire by Water, to the 2020 novels, Christopher Beha's The Index of Self-Destructive Acts, and then Missionaries by Phil Clay, who won the National Book Award in 2014. And I hope to be able to reference these and their significance for Catholic letters as the conversation unfolds tonight. Thank you. And so I'll turn the conversation from here over to Karen.
Thank you, Joshua. First, I want to thank Jared, Terrence, Emmy, Bernardo, the Saint Benedict Institute, the Collegium Institute, all of our sponsors, everyone who worked to put this event together, and of course, all of you who are here attending. Thank you. I think this is a great way to further the conversation about Catholic literature and hopefully forge some connections to build a stronger community where it can flourish. When we look at the state of Catholic fiction today, I think there are three main parts to the infrastructure of a successful industry that we need to consider: the writers, the publishers, and the readers. What I see right now is that we have no shortage of writers. The number of excellent submissions that I've had to decline as an editor, both short fiction at Dappled Things and in less than a year of evaluating novels for Collegium Press, is staggering. The writers are out there, they are ready. Don't ask, where are the Catholic writers? The publishing infrastructure is still young, but it is being built, as you can see by the presses represented here today. Other than Ignatius, they're all less than 10 years old, and Collegium Press is less than 1. So that piece is well on its way, although I think we still have plenty of room to expand. What's missing is a culture of readership for the works that are being produced. Catholics have not been brought up to expect their fiction to reflect their faith. We don't have the kind of robust, ready-made market that's available to evangelicals. And I think trying to conquer the secular market before we make significant inroads among Catholics is an approach that puts the cart before the horse. Although, of course, I have no objections to entering the secular market. I think we're taking an important step toward building that Catholic readership here today, bringing together the influence of universities, book publishers, journals, writers, and hopefully a lot of readers out there listening tonight, because I think the only way that we will succeed at building a readership for Catholic fiction is to work together as the body of Christ, to support each other as we evangelize our brothers and sisters about the power of fiction and its role in our faith. And that's what it has to be. It has to be a mission of evangelization, because if we view it strictly as an effort at marketing a commercial product, we miss the point. We also have to remember that we are Christians first, and the way of Christ is the way of the cross. The metrics that the secular world uses to judge a successful book, such as sales figures or prizes like the Pulitzer or the National Book Award, are not things we should ignore. But we also can't allow them to define success or failure when it comes to something that bears the label of Catholic. The wisdom of this world is the foolishness of God. I recently read a book about the 16 Carmelite martyrs of Compiègne. After they were expelled from their convent by the French Revolution, they spent 2 years praying, offering themselves daily as a holocaust to end the terror. When they were finally arrested and sent to the guillotine, they sang the entire way there, the chorus growing softer only as each one slipped her way up the bloody steps of the scaffold to offer her life as a sacrifice to end the slaughter. We have to remember that that is what Christian victory looks like. It is a song that continues despite the fact that the blood that flows in the streets is ours, because Christ has already triumphed over death. So I think the question I want to pose tonight is, how can we be strong Christian witnesses in the Catholic fiction industry? What does that look like? Hopefully that's something that we can discover together, both in our discussion here tonight and through our experiences as we write, publish, and read the stories that the Spirit inspires. But whatever we do, we have to do it because it rises from the promptings of the Holy Spirit. We have to be prepared to fail in the eyes of the world, which will not matter at all if we succeed in cultivating the fruits of the Spirit within ourselves and within those whose imaginations we touch with our stories. And that's all I wanted to say to open, so I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne.
Hi, everybody. My name is Suzanne Wolf, and I'm here primarily as a novelist. So I am a novelist, I'm a Catholic, but I am not a Catholic novelist. This is what Flannery O'Connor had to say about Catholic novelists in her essay of that title. The Catholic novelist frequently becomes so entranced with his Christian state that he forgets his nature as a fiction writer. And she went on to say, St. Thomas Aquinas says that art does not require rectitude of the appetite, that it is wholly concerned with the good of the thing made. If I write to convey a Christian Catholic message, then all I will produce is propaganda on behalf of the church. I will not produce art. The culture wars has destroyed conversation. And that's one of the reasons why this is such a wonderful venue tonight, because we can have a conversation that was possible, as Dana Gioia says in his essay, during the Catholic, what he calls the Catholic Renaissance of the 50s. But that time is now past. Our contemporary culture's preferred method of communication is via the slogans and propaganda of competing ideologies. But I believe that the writer who is a Catholic should resist picking up the megaphone and joining the shouting match. I believe that this will not only be futile, but will also destroy the artist's work. I think that novelists and poets should do the work proper to their art, namely to go out into the highways and byways, to eat with the publicans and the sinners, to pluck the ears of wheat on the Sabbath. No aspect of life is closed to them. No word is verboten. To label a novelist Catholic is to burden them with the letter and not the spirit of the law. This is not their job. Let the preachers, the apologists, and the theologians do their job, and the novelist do her own job. And to end with Flannery O'Connor again, the Catholic novelist doesn't have to be a saint. He doesn't even have to be Catholic. He does, unfortunately, have to be a novelist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for that great introduction to our conversation. So I'm hoping from here on we can take it in a more spontaneous conversation. And so, I've got some questions to follow up on what was said, and basically, as the Spirit moves you, you can go ahead and give us your points of view. So I guess I'm going to start with something along the lines of what Suzanne was just talking about. I think all of us here are probably deeply interested in Catholic literature, and yet Catholic literature remains a notoriously difficult term to define. So one thing I'm wondering is, however you define it, what do you think are some of the best exemplars of it today? And what books and writers are you most excited about, and why?
So if I could just begin by pointing to a couple of different, really, again, imperfect divisions, but maybe some things to get us started. On the one hand, you have novels like Suzanne's The Confessions of X, right, written in 2016. And I would put Ron Hansen's Marriott in Ecstasy in a similar category, as well as Alice McDermott's The Ninth Hour, which is 2017 novel, right? In all of these cases, all three of those novels are very much concerned with religious questions or spiritual matters, the ultimate things, but they're all staged or placed in the past, right? And so one, I guess you could say, and again, I'm using blunt terms here, like strategies. Forgive me, I know that to think of them as such is to debase them, but so maybe we can say approaches. One approach would be that approach of setting these stories in a time period where you could say we didn't live in a secular world or a postmodern world or a post-secular world, but where there was this sort of religious fabric, right, at the center of being and society. Another approach would be what the route that's been taken by the Catholic German Catholic novelist Martin Mosebach, and most who know Mosebach know him from his book The Heresy of Formlessness, which is a kind of defense of the Latin Mass that originally came out through Ignatius and was republished by Angelico recently. But the readers of Mosebach's The Heresy of Formlessness, I can almost guarantee you, have not read his novels, which are very widely esteemed and read in Germany. He won the very prestigious Buchner Prize for the excellence of his fiction. And in his novel, What Was Before, he tells a story that is, you could say, a study of the upper sort of bourgeois in Germany, wealthy people who are kind of bored and stepping on each other's toes. And it's a comedy of manners, but you could read the novel from beginning to end and not know anything about his faith, even though he's ardent and in defending it in his nonfiction. And then I think I would put in the sort of the next tier or category would be something like The Index of Self-Destructive Acts, the Beha novel that I referenced earlier. Again, Beha's the editor of Harper's, so he has a pretty big stage. The novel explores this kind of longing and thirst in the post-secular world for the sacred. So you have characters who try to find the sacred by visiting a psychic. You have a character, an ex-military vet, who witnesses a self-proclaimed prophet baptizing people in a fountain in Washington Square in New York. And he gives away all of his money to this self-proclaimed prophet. But those parts of the novel, I would argue, are actually the sort of the thinnest part. They're not the best written parts of the novel. The best written parts of Beha's most recent novel, again, this came out in 2020, are those that kind of satirize the New York set for committing what he calls self-destructive acts, which is a sort of interesting paraphrase of St. Paul's I do what I do not will to do, as you know, sort of channeled for our times. But he really is at his best, I would say, when he's doing what he says Henry James did, which is just sort of problematize the secular conception of the self from within its own parameters, rather than necessarily directing us towards religious answers to those questions. And then I would say the last one I'd point to is Phil Clay, who in Missionaries has this incredible scene where there's a young man, he's recalling his youth in Colombia. A military man is recalling his youth when he, on Easter morning, accidentally wandered in on the military base to the women's bathroom, and he accidentally beholds a naked woman bathing. And when he sees her, it's sort of like a Dante and Beatrice moment mixed with the fall narrative, because he sees her bathing, and then he gets an erection. And so he feels horrible about this and tries to eliminate it from his imagination. Later on, he finds out that the scars that he saw all over her body were a result of her victimization, and that she carried her baby to term in spite of that. And he happens to be present at the baptism of that baby, which is how he sort of puts all these pieces together. And when he sees her later on, he says that he tried to sort of idealize her. He says, "I tried to exercise the impression she made on my young mind. I would write a series of terrible poems about her in which she was an idealized figure, an eternal image of Columbia, a scarred goddess displaying her wounds and bringing forth unblemished new life," and so on. So here we clearly have, right, the Dante transfiguring Beatrice kind of motif, but that ultimately, he says, doesn't work, and he decides that she actually signifies nothing. And then, in spite of the fact that he previously experienced his faith before that moment as being very deep and profound, he says that he loses it, right? But at the last moment, even though he's turned away from the faith, his daughter Valencia turns toward the faith at the very moment when he's turning away from it. And he says that the effect that Valencia had on me was being like that sense of God I'd had as a child, of eternity wounding the material world, wounding the boundaries of my own brain and body, and making me part of a larger story. In the case, the cosmic drama of the universe outside of time. A drama, he says, that he no longer believes in, but that he still wants to. So I would say that these are sort of distinctive strategies.
I'll go next if that's okay. The ones that I'm going to show you are simply the ones that I happen to have actual physical copies of, as opposed to the ones that I read on ebooks. But this one is actually not written by a Catholic. It's Big in Heaven by Father Stephen Ciniari, who is an Orthodox priest. And it just came out last year. And it's a collection of short stories centered around a priest named Naum in a neighborhood in Philadelphia. And he does an amazing job of just capturing the little everyday moments in the lives of both the faithful and the not faithful. Father Stephen himself has spent much of his life in street ministry. So you're going to find, prostitutes and drug addicts and those sorts of characters popping up in his fiction, because he knows a lot about that lifestyle and ministering to them. And he does an amazing job of capturing just the little minute details of life where grace can enter. Sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly, sometimes people say, "No thanks, Father," and walk away. But it's a really lovely collection. The next one I wanted to mention was Natalie Morrell's The Ghost Keeper. Natalie is the fiction editor at Dappled Things. I have to say that. So she's my friend, and this is also only available in Canada. So if you want to read it, which you do want to read it, I promise you want to read it, you have to order it from a Canadian retailer. It's the story of a Jewish man in Nazi Austria rather, who he's the keeper of a Jewish cemetery. And that's his ministry that he does, is keeping the cemetery, which no one else wants to. So he is the ghost keeper, the one who keeps the stories. And his family gets torn apart through the Nazi occupation. And it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful story.
I agree. And if I can interject for a second, I just looked it up, and I can tell you that you can find it in regular Amazon now.
Oh, can you? Oh, okay,
Yes.
Great. That's wonderful. It
is a wonderful book.
It didn't used to be that way. And now we're going to get into some of, anybody who knows me knows that I love fantasy and horror and sci-fi and all that kind of thing. So this is Rosamund Hodge, Crimson Bound. It's a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. It's classified as YA fantasy, but it's pretty dark and wonderfully so. And she does what fantasy can do so well, which is to take universal concepts and embody them in characters that you have totally invented in a way that makes them real and alive in ways that we don't see in ordinary life and gives us new perspective. So, for example, she's the main character, Rochelle, is learning to be a sort of, not exactly priestess, but someone who carries on the traditions of her people. And her aunt asks her, "And who is the devourer?" "The God of the firstborn," said Rochelle. "Father Pierre says he doesn't really exist, or anyway, he's not a god, because there is only one God, and he made heaven and earth. He doesn't try to eat them. But whatever the devourer was, he had the sun and the moon in his belly until Tyr and Zisa stole them and put them in the sky." So she has an immolated God in this book who is literally cut in pieces rather than Christ on the cross. And she just does, it's fun. Go read it.
Hey, I wonder if I could interject a tiny bit. I don't mean to interrupt you, Karen. Did you have another book?
Yeah, I did. But
okay. Oh, I just wanted to say, I think we should be careful maybe of our terms here. I think on the one hand, we're sort of using Catholic novelist fairly loosely, Catholic literature. Joshua, I think, touched on this, and Bernardo too, I think. I think we ought to perhaps use the word Catholic imagination, or talk about why maybe Catholic imagination or sacramental imagination is preferable to Catholic novelist.
Okay.
Because, as I said about, quoting Flannery O'Connor, is that the only business of the novelist is to tell the truth about life, wherever they find it, whether it's in a ghetto, whether it's in a war, whether it's in a brothel, whether it's in a concentration camp, wherever. And I think that if novelists who are Catholics, like myself, get too hung up on the message.
Oh, absolutely.
Then you get, as I said, bad art. That our whole focus as a writer, I'm speaking, is to look unblinkingly at life and render it as honestly as one can.
I agree.
I think that's true, except I would say that, right, we can't possibly look unblinkingly in the sense of some sort of supernatural photorealism implanted in a human brain that would allow us, right, to see everything as it is happening simultaneously. So art is in large part, as Willa Cather says, right, a process of selection. O'Connor says the same thing.
Agreed.
Right? And so I think that what what it means to have a Catholic imagination, to kind of build on what you're saying, Suzanne, is that the possible things that can be imitated in fiction, right, increase to compare to, let's say, someone who is an unbeliever.
Absolutely.
So I would say that, right, you have a number of different possible scenarios, including the one where someone could imagine that if I'm a Catholic novelist, I need to write only about explicitly Catholic things, and they might actually do that very badly, but they think that they are doing God's work because they're imitating God or something like that. And so, right, it goes without saying, I think, or there's no question that a lot of the novels that have been written in the last 20 years, the best novels that have been written, are not written by Catholic novelists, are not Catholic fiction in any sort of sense, but they're things that all of us can deepen our souls by encountering.
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, I do think that, right, it's important also not to lose sight of the distinctiveness of the sacramental imagination that allows us to move from the scene, not just into another scene, but from the seen to the unseen And there's a sense in which, Mauriac and O'Connor and all our old beloved heroes in the old crew, they hated the term the Catholic novelist or the Catholic novelist, but they also sort of used it too.
but the interesting thing there is that, in this sort of golden time of the Catholic Renaissance, Flannery O'Connor chooses to write in the grotesque,
right? Because
she knows that if she writes like Gone with the Wind with a Catholic kind of, theme, it's not real,
right.
It's not true.
Right.
And so she chooses the grotesque in order to, it's like the Scud missile or that goes under the detection, of the reader and then sort of explodes in the heart.
I think that's right. But I would just say really quickly but she's not just using sort of particular genres or subgenres such as the grotesque and the comic, which she is doing. You're right. She's also going to daily mass. She's also reading 20 minutes of St. Thomas Aquinas every night. And that is what is expanding her vision. It's the depth of the practice of her faith that allows her to carry out some of those grotesqueries with the panache that she's able to put on.
Well, but that, I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm not sure about that. I mean, even if she'd been a bad Catholic, I think her talent would have, but anyway.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I would say this, if I can interject for a moment. So I think that this conversation is great, and I think it's precisely why I phrased the question the way I did, because I think, and this is something that I think has been with us for many years, which is this sense of using the term Catholic literature or Catholic novelist, or referring to the Catholic imagination and so forth, that it I think is almost inherently a contested term, and a term that also makes some people feel uncomfortable, also feels comforting to other people, and there's going to be some back and forth there. And I think that that one thing that Dana Gioia, just to get back to the essay that we were referencing at the beginning, that he says is he talks about Catholic literature. He says Catholic literature is rarely pious. In ways that sometimes trouble or puzzle both Protestant and secular readers, Catholic writing tends to be comic, rowdy, rude, and even violent. And then he goes on to say basically that the Catholic worldview does not require a sacred subject to express its sense of divine immanence. And so I think whether we feel comfortable with that term or we don't feel comfortable with that term, I think we can all agree that Catholic literature or literature that is shaped by a Catholic imagination does have, let's say, there's a family resemblance, even if there can be very different types of works. There is a family resemblance in the sense that the Catholic novelist that is a true novelist, that wants to say what is real, at the same time is approaching reality, from the experience of the faith, and the faith is kind of like what Joshua was saying here, a sifting instrument in the novelist's vision, right? And so I think whether we feel comfortable with the term or we don't feel comfortable with the term, I think both are really valid viewpoints, really. And one thing I'm curious, and just to go back to the original question, is precisely as we discuss whether this is a valid way of portraying things, or how we define Catholic imagination or Catholic literature, like what are some of the books that are doing some of the things that we would hope, however we define that term, that this literature would do, because I do think we agree, whether we are comfortable with the term or not, that there is something that we're looking for in this that is definitely not propaganda, but that is a sense of vision of reality that we hope certain novels would express. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Karen's had her hand up for a while.
Two things that I would like to say is one, I have no problem with the term Catholic novelist. I am a Catholic, I am a novelist, and there is no way for me to separate the two. I could not be the novelist that I am if I were not Catholic, and I really don't think I would be the Catholic that I am if I were not also a novelist, because there are a lot of things that I discover about my own faith through the process of writing. So I have no issues with it. On the other hand, I have also no issues with Flannery O'Connor saying, that the Catholic novelist does not have to be a Catholic. I have found that to be true too, that there are many ways that God makes himself known to us, and he uses whatever instrument is available. And he is certainly willing to use people who would not necessarily say, yes, please come, let me be your instrument. And also I think that baptism, it leaves an indelible mark upon our souls. That's one of our core beliefs. So there's no way to escape it. If the lens through which we view the world has been permanently altered by our life as baptized Christians. We have died and risen. Whether you want to acknowledge that in your everyday life or not, it has happened. And I think that if we, as I said, I have no issue bringing in other people who can teach us. We can learn from anyone. We can enjoy the beautiful art created by anyone. They don't have to be a Catholic. But at the same time, as you said, Bernardo, there's a family resemblance, and it comes from that communal life that we share by virtue of our baptism. The second thing that I would like to say is that Gioia's definition of rowdy, rude, comic, etc., he uses tends to, generally, etc. There are lots of, it's not a definite, it's not set in stone, that that's the only way we can do these things. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to have a romance novel or a mystery novel or just go on a trip with aliens and enjoy it. And somewhere along the way, the sacramental imagination is employed in that process as well. That I think sometimes we forget, and we have to consider readers when we're thinking of these things. And there are many readers out there who have neither the inclination nor the education to appreciate some of the novelists that we've mentioned from the past, like Flannery O'Connor and Graham Greene and Walker Percy and so on and so forth. And those people deserve good stories too. So I think we need to broaden, this is the Catholic faith. It is the universal church that, as I forget who it was that called it, Here Comes Everybody. But
James
it is
Joyce.
James Joyce. It's everybody. And we have to keep in mind that everybody matters, and our readers are not simply one particular kind of person looking for one particular kind of book. Yeah. Which leads me to that last book I really wanted to mention, which is one from Ignatius. So thank you, Vivian. Eleanor Borg Nicholson's A Bloody Habit. Let's go stake some vampires, y'all. It's fun. And it's raucous. It's rowdy and all those things, but at the same time, it's fun and it's filled with insight. And yet it's not a sermon, it's a story.
Right, I think that's fantastic, and that's a great point to move the discussion into something else that I wanted to ask about, which is, are we thinking sometimes when we have discussions about Catholic literature, are we sometimes thinking too narrowly? For example, now that you mentioned romance novels and mysteries and so forth, right? What role should popular and genre fiction have in this conversation? I know Vivian, for example, mentioned also YA novels. I'm curious, Vivian, from your perch as a Ignatius editor, you probably see a lot of books sent your way. I'm curious, what sort of things are you seeing? What sort of role do you see for these more popular genres?
We are seeing a broadening of genre in what's being sent to us, as Karen held up the vampire, the Bloody Habit vampire story. And in fact, we're going to be coming out with another vampire story by the British Maltese author Fiorella de Maria. She and Kevin Turley are jointly writing a novel about an interview with Bela Lugosi. And it's full of the creep factor. It's really good. So and Fiorella has also written several murder mysteries, the Father Gabriel series. Those are set in post-war Britain, kind of like Foyle's War combined with, brother, whatever his face, Father
Brown.
Yeah, Father Brown. Father Brown meets Foyle's War. Okay, it's that kind of thing. And then the young adult. Okay, so we are currently publishing a series of novels for young people set in the Roman Empire under Diocletian during the persecution of Christians. And what's interesting about these stories, they're written by a French author, so they're being translated. And what's interesting about these stories is that the protagonists aren't Christian at all. They're pagan boys. One's a slave and the other two are friends. But they brush up against Christians from time to time. And now you see this very astonishing, uncomfortable witness breaking into the pagan world and causing these boys to think about things that they might not have thought of before. So really, we're just seeing a flood of different kinds of things for different kinds of audiences. And I think it's terrific.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could just say, yeah, I mean, I think genre writing is great. I mean, I write in the mystery genre, Elizabethan mystery, and my protagonist is a recusant Catholic in 1580s London. Interesting, Joshua, you said the sort of selection. Yes, to write about the past, ancient Carthage or Elizabethan London, you can have a setting that has that sort of Christian Catholic worldview. Sure, and that's interesting. But a lot of contemporary writers, I mean, I think we have to be careful not to, make this a sort of sectarian thing. I think we have to be open to not just lapsed Catholics, but atheists and agnostics. Because why? Because we have a common humanity, and we are made in the image and likeness of God. And so that the heart's deepest longing will manifest, and that in a great writer manifests, so I think we're sort of, we might be fishing with a fishing rod instead of using a net, when we sort of define ourselves, when Dana Gioia kind of calls for a great sort of Catholic Renaissance, I think that in a sense, quoting John Paul II, I mean, we have to be sort of contra mundum in a way. I mean, the faith is in a sense contra mundum. The times are never going to be perfect, right? I mean, the times for the early Christians, they were living in they were worshiping the catacombs because they were being butchered for their faith. Today, we're being shamed for it or made fun of. But I mean, it's sort of the same, as a historian myself, it's kind of the same. And so I think that, Flannery would say that the writer is a realist is a prophet, and there's a realist of distances. The Catholic imagination can see the anagogical in the natural, but you've got to start with the natural. You cannot bypass the natural. And if you do, I believe you end up with, it doesn't matter what genre, you end up with, you know, inferior work. And I'm not talking about genres being inferior. I'm talking about the quality of the writing itself.
I think that everyone,
being
I think everyone,
derivative,
I think that everyone in the room though tonight agrees with that as a sort of like just goes without saying kind of premise. I think that all of us would be,
I hope so,
would find it both sort of sacrilegious, right, to encounter heresy, but just as blasphemous, so to speak, to encounter badly made art. I think that these are things that we sort of all agree upon. I think that there are, you know, some perils that could come about from what you're describing, but certainly the Catholic Literary Imagination Conference that's happened every 2 years has not been an occasion of that. There have been people who are unbelievers, atheists, right? Panels on James Joyce, who left the faith, even though he secretly attended liturgy on Easter every year. And so I actually don't think that that should be a real sort of conscience pricking concern until it has to be. I would say that for all of the limitations that might come from using a term like Catholic literature, there have been in 70 times 7 greater goods, including for me, the greatest friendships that I've ever been able to forge have been from either writing Catholic novelists or novelists who are Catholic and striking up correspondence with them, or working on a literary magazine alongside fellow Catholics. I don't think that this is actually a bad thing. You know, Jack Kerouac said that literature's purpose is to ensure that we maintain that human connection, and these sorts of categorizations have allowed that those connections to intensify. I also would say that, right, the idea of sort of like opening up the gates and becoming more and more and more expansive has its own limits. Speaking of, you know, comedy, Suzanne, you had mentioned the genre of comedy and how many writers are Catholic writers. Randy Boyagoda, who's a comic writer, in his novel, Original Prin, which just came out, I think, 2 years ago, satirizes this idea of making the faith too kind of watered down and all-inclusive in that novel, when he says that the college that the protagonist works at, which is Holy Family College, was, quote, becoming increasingly irrelevant and too Catholic seeming. So they changed its name to the University of the Family Universal, or UFU. And without stating the expletive for all of the children in the audience, I think we know what he's saying, right? That name, right, that name can go F itself, in a sense, right?
But I'm not talking about watering it down at all. I'm talking about casting a wider net is here comes everybody, which is what Karen said. And I mean that's our common humanity. Those are our brothers and sisters.
Sure.
Yeah, I think
I'm not talking about watering it down at all.
I agree with
that.
And I think maybe there's one thing that is centering, this conversation is centering around, which we haven't mentioned, which is, I think, the specter of the Catholic ghetto. And I feel like the Catholic.
I don't think that's anything to fear.
So here's what I was wondering about. Yeah, so the Catholic ghetto is a term that often gets brought up in these conversations. And so, and it always does seem to be mentioned as a bad thing, right? But is there, first of all, two questions. One, is there really a Catholic literary ghetto? And besides, the kind of ethnic enclaves sometimes, you know, that in if you think about a real ghetto, right? These kinds of ethnic enclaves often tend to be the most vibrant and distinctive neighborhoods in a city. So one thing I'm wondering is, even if there is a Catholic literary ghetto, to what extent is it a bad thing? To what extent is it a good thing? Could it give writers of faith an edge, a distinctiveness that might actually be what we need in a kind of increasingly bland, cosmopolitan, you know, commercial culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, so with Wise But
I don't think that we need to fear.
Go ahead, Karen.
I don't think that we need to fear the Catholic ghetto. First of all, as Joshua already said, when we have, you know, these Catholic presses, these Catholic conferences, and get-togethers like tonight, one thing we're doing is forging community and building the body of Christ together as brothers and sisters with a common interest. And it's a wonderful thing in forging friendships. And I don't know where I would be without other friends that I've met over the past several years as I became active in the Catholic literary, whatever it is. But another thing I think I would mention is just my own experience. Joshua published me for the first time for my debut novel of Jennifer the Dam. And it's a vampire novel, if you couldn't tell from the title. And it is the most Catholic novel I could possibly have written. It is about a vampire who longs to drink the blood of Christ in the Eucharist. It's there ain't no bones about it. It's about as Catholic as it can be. And the best reception it's ever had is among people at I live in Louisiana, and I went down to a bar outside of New Orleans that was geared toward nerds. It's named Bad Wolf after Doctor Who, and they were having a little like mini convention there. And they were also holding a fundraiser for LGBTQ awareness and groups that helped. I mean, it was about the least Catholic thing you could possibly have. And I went down there and I read an excerpt from Jennifer the Damned, and I sold out in about 10 minutes. And they love it because it's real, because it does exactly what Suzanne is asking for, and it touches on all those universal human desires. So I don't think we need to fear it, because if we're making good art, it will be received. Maybe not by the New York Times, but it will be received by readers who want to read good books, regardless of whether they're Catholic or not. And I think the challenge, as I talked about a little bit in the opening, is finding those people to read our books. And I think the obvious place to start is with Catholics, because they're going to be a little bit more open to something like Eleanor's book that has Dominicans slaying vampires. Well, at least Catholics know what Dominicans are. So that might be, but once those people have gotten in, then they go to their friends and they say, this is an amazing book, not an amazing Catholic book, but just an amazing book.
Good. Yeah. So Karen, if I could interject, you know, on the other hand, I think, right, as Piers Paul Reed says, right, if you take that sort of approach of focusing in on the Catholic crowd, you're also likely to be severely disappointed, because very rarely is there kind of correlation between piety and literary sophistication among Catholics. You know, and so, and Flannery O'Connor experienced the same thing. If I'm remembering correctly, this could be an apocryphal story. If it is, please don't tell me, because I love it. I think that Flannery O'Connor's works were the first place that they were censored and forbidden was at a Catholic school, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I mean, so I would say, you know, that is a real sort of peril or threat. On the other hand, I do think that there's a lot of work that can be done on the parish level. The Catholics make up a large part of the U.S. population, as Joya says, right? It's 25%, something like that. That's a lot of people. And so I think it's fair to say that, you know, a lot of those people will just never, no matter what, read literature or love it. Fine. They don't need to read literature in order to get to heaven, unfortunately. But unfortunately for our own self-importance and self-promotion, right? But on the other hand, in seriousness, right, isn't it fair to say that if we can, on the parish level, give talks, write reviews in parish bulletins, teaching Catholics how to appreciate this sort of weird and grotesque animal that many of them might be terrified by because it deals with people having affairs and etc. That there are profound goods that can come from that.
Oh yeah.
Isn't it the case that
Absolutely.
if we can give literarily minded talks at at parishes, that actually even priests might be influenced by hearing beautiful poems recited by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and the next week the homily will be twice as good as it was last week because he's returned to Hopkins' terrible sonnets, and it swept him into a kind of divine madness, right? And so there are tremendous goods that can come from those small efforts. And that, by the way, that is sort of the argument that I try to make in this book, which is how to read and write like a Catholic. It's come out from TAN, which is a non-academic publisher, a commercial press, mainly pitching towards quote unquote everyday or normal Catholics. And so that's sort of, again, a limited, but I think essential route.
Suzanne, did you have something to add about that?
I agree with what Joshua says about on the parish level, of course. I think that, I mean, I agree when he says, you can get to heaven without reading literature, but you can't get to heaven if you hate the world, right? And one of the things about the great novelists, and I'm thinking the great novelists, right? Like Tolstoy and Sigrid Undset and Jane Austen, is that, and Virginia Woolf, is that this real sort of love for their characters is present. That even their foolish characters, even their evil characters, there's a great charity present. Because why? I think because they look at the world with a novelist's eye and they love it. They see that it is good, right? And so I think that worldview, doesn't have to be elitist or anything. This isn't about elitism or academics. This is about life, right? Literature is about life. It's not a subject in school. It's about life. It's about characters and books. And my preference is not to preach to the choir. My preference is to go out among the Gentiles, to go out amongst the publicans and the sinners. My protagonist in The Course of All Treasons, and the first novel of the Elizabethan series, A Murder by Any Name, he is, as I mentioned, a recusant Catholic who does not practice his faith because he doesn't want to end up in the tower. But he doesn't really practice any faith. He lives in the most disreputable part of London, Bankside, and he's the owner of a tavern called the Black Sheep. And the Black Sheep is named because, in a sense, he is a black sheep. He's a black sheep in his social class and in his religion, and in his occupation. He's also a spy. So, and he rubs shoulders with villains and actors and whores and bear baiters, and there's this tremendous sort of life. And the thing is, I don't feel a need to sort of judge any of my characters on the category, whether they're baptized or not baptized, or saved or not saved. They just are, and that their kind of life is their own. And if that life that they have cannot attract anyone, right? Not just the Catholic, not just whatever. If it cannot attract anyone, as you might be attracted to a human being in conversation in the street, then it's failed, right? And I think that's the bar for if we want to, as Karen said in her opening remarks, evangelize, right?
Absolutely.
Well,
I think we have to draw, as von Balthasar said, through beauty.
I agree.
And
I agree,
it's-
Suzanne. But could I just say, right? I agree that it's through beauty, sure. But I think it's also possible, right? Von Balthasar says, sort of seems to suggest that whereas goodness and the Pontifical document for the Pontifical Council for Culture says the same thing, that right in our time, as you're sort of saying, truth has been instrumentalized by ideology. Goodness is typically horizontalized. It's taken away from the source of goodness, which is charity. And so we can rely on beauty to attract these young Augustines. But as you said yourself, Suzanne, right earlier, novels deal with life, human life. We're not talking about still life paintings or this sort of distillation or this encapsulation of the beauty of being per se, right? I mean, novels deal with sinners, of course, and of course the good novelist, either like George Eliot, strive to inculcate sympathy in the readers, as in Middlemarch, for example, or like George Saunders, will try to stimulate Christian charity in the readers. But there's also a limit to sympathy or just sort of an acceptance and a suspension of judgment as a legitimate end for fiction, because that's a judgment itself. You have judged that suspension of judgment is the right judgment. And I don't think that it's fair to say that we would be content with a novel that asks us to go too far for example, in sympathizing with Stalin.
Well,
can I interject here, because I see Vivian has a point, and I think we are getting towards the end of our time. So I think we want to leave a little bit of time for questions from the audience. So I think let's go with Vivian and then move on to questions from the audience.
right.
I would like to respond to something Joshua just said about beauty. Where is it found in literature? And Mortimer Adler, the founder of the Great Books Program at the University of Chicago, a Jewish man who became, by the way, a Catholic at the age of 94 before he died. He said that the beauty of works of imagination, written works of imagination, lies in its very similitude to reality, what Suzanne is saying. In other words, the closer it is to the reality of the thing you're looking at, the more beautiful it will be, the more pleasing it will be to the reader. Now, to try to synthesize that now with what Karen was saying about, yes, but the eye looking at the thing in front of me has been given a certain vision, has been baptized, has been redeemed. And so now we're both looking at the same corpse in the street. And yet the eye of the Christian will see that was a person once. That's not just that's just a bag of cells. So there's these two things going on if we're going to talk about Catholic novelists, right? It's the seeing and representing what one sees well, which is what makes a work beautiful. But then also it's a kind of seeing. And so that's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's what Flannery means by realist of distances. Yeah, the anagogical and the literal.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions from the audience. So we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. For that, I'd say let's try to keep responses brief, and maybe if one panelist, a different panelist maybe can address each one as you are inspired. I think this one references Karen, so I'm going to start with that. This one is from Christopher Inabnit. It says, I appreciated Karen Ullo's point that much work needs to be done in developing a reading culture among Catholics. Is that the job of publishers, parishes, etc.? I notice societies like Communion and Liberation or Opus Dei have developed reading cultures pretty naturally among their youth members on the micro scale. So what do you think about that?
I think it's the job of everyone. It would be wonderful if we could start with Catholic schools and parish schools of religion and train our children to give them a better sense of literature in general than it seems that they're getting now. especially in the works that we prize as Catholics as having encapsulated our vision well. It would be wonderful if we could start there. If we can't start there because I don't have a magic wand, then yes, let's start wherever we can start.
Okay. I think, did we lose Karen? Looks like we may have lost Karen.
Like Word on Fire with Bishop Barron, or whether it's something like, you know, Magnificat magazine. Just start where you can start. If we have, I know we have representatives of many universities here. So what's in your library? What's on your course offerings? And I trust Joshua and his program to get to load that well. But how, you know, what are we offering wherever we touch Catholics in their lives? And how can we improve that? Can we, you know, can we look at what's on the shelf for the 8th graders and maybe include some works that they will connect with that are written from a Catholic imagination?
Okay, great. To that point, actually, there's another question here from Ashley Dickinson, and it relates a little bit to the questions of identity in literature that are very popular right now. And so she says this, she says, what about showing young children people living their faith? So many secular books right now talk about children seeing themselves in literature. Is it important for kids and teens, I'm guessing who are you know, people of faith, to see themselves in literature today? Like, what do you all think about that?
Well, I co-authored a book, Books That Build Character, with my husband many years ago. So maybe I should tackle that. And I've also taught education courses. You know, I think any and all literature appropriate to their age groups, they should be encouraged to read or to be read aloud to. I don't think it should be pious. You know, I read the Chronicles of Narnia when I was little and had no idea, none, that it was a sort of parable, you know, in a sense. It was an allegory. And in fact, when I was a teenager and I found out, I was kind of mad. You know, I thought Lewis had played a trick on me. But I loved them and I still read them. And so I think for children especially, I think that they do much better when they can delight in something rather than when they're being taught at, you know. And of course, the best literature for children is when you can seamlessly combine both, right? Because children don't know much because they have no experience. So they do need, you know, teaching. But, you know, Little Red Riding Hood, and it's exciting, and it's a dark wood, and it's a wolf, and you know, but it's like, don't talk to strangers. You know, but the kid sort of takes that in without hearing the didacticism, and that's children. Yeah, no, I mean, I think reading aloud is a wonderful thing. I think making up stories aloud to your children, you know, Greg did that. The Magic Kingdom is what he told our children, and read to them extensively. And my 10-year-old eldest daughter could recite the Battle of Lepanto, the entire poem, and it's very long. And at the same time, she read Lord of the Rings herself. For pleasure. So I, you know, children are amazing. They can do amazing things, and we should expose them to as much great literature as we can. Silas Marner, for example, would be wonderful for a child.
Okay, so I've got a totally different kind of question here. I'm guessing from a writer. who is asking, what kind of book submissions do you wish you received more frequently? So I feel like I would open this for several or for all of you, since you're all associated with presses in one way or another.
Vivian, would you mind?
What is my ideal submission? Double spaced.
Yes. 14 point.
You know, yes, a 12 point, please. But you know, I can't tell you how many times when I'm reading something, I'm thinking, and I'm on the acquisitions committee at Ignatius Press, by the way, so I see a lot. I often think to myself, did this person spend that much time on this? Did they reread their own writing to themselves? Did they read it out loud? Do they know what this sounds like? I have a feeling that authors, especially new authors, don't appreciate how much hard work writing really is. And that it's not just a function of the mind, it's also a function of the ear. And I really encourage people, read it out loud to yourself and anyone who will put up with you. And before you submit it.
Great. How about we go next to Karen? What kind of books do you wish you were getting?
Dramatic tension. If I cannot identify what your character wants and what they're going to try to do to get it within the first, within your little blurb that you give me, your 1 paragraph synopsis, or at least the full synopsis, if I can't find the dramatic tension, I will be bored to tears. Please,
Amen.
please give me tension. And don't, that's, the slogan we had in grad school was never be boring. And that has also been adopted at Prison Press as well. Don't bore me. I don't need 30 pages of backstory. Get to it.
Great.
The plot is the soul of the story, as Aristotle said.
Amen.
Although I actually would say that the character is. You know how newborn babies, the thing that they love the most is the human face. You know, they'll sort of vector in on the human face. And it's the same, I think, with readers. It's the human, it's the person, it's the character, it's their body, heart, mind, and soul. And that's what grabs. You know, so that and that strange phenomenon, right, where you can actually root for a bad guy because they're human, right?
But you can root for them because
like
they have a goal.
You know,
Well, the only way you can root for them is if things start happening. So
right.
you
Of course.
really
Right.
both, right? You obviously you have to have great
Exactly.
characters that you care about and connect with on a human level, but then things have got to happen so that you can put them on.
Well,
Right, you can't root for them if they're sitting there fishing. You know, they have to have a goal that they're pursuing. So
someone
that
pursuing them.
reveals the character.
May I be correct in seeing that you're all, you know, kind of along a continuum, and where you are along the continuum also kind of might be related to the kind of books you're looking for?
Well, you know, slant books, I mean, we're looking for a kind of meticulous craft and passion for language that are harder and harder to come by. And you know, these are the books that you look at the whole person, and by that I'm talking now about the sort of the Catholic imagination, in that you know, the human being isn't simply an animal. The human being is not a robot. The human being is a person with personhood, in the John Paul II sense of that sense of personhood. And that's what I mean. And let me just add about plot, Vivian. E.M. Forster, I don't know whether you've ever heard this, but E.M. Forster gave the greatest definition of plot I've ever heard, very brief. He said, this is not plot, right? The king died, then the queen died. And then he said, this is plot. The king died, then the queen died of grief.
That's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
I am not arguing with you at all.
Yeah, no, I know you're not. I'm kind of agreeing with you.
Yeah.
In a sense, yeah.
But back to Bernardo's question, is this conversation representative of the sorts of manuscripts we're looking for? And I would say that Ignatius Press, whatever comes in the door, we publish what we like.
Exactly.
Isn't like we're in search of something, we're waiting for something, we're hoping for something. If it comes in the door, we like it, we publish it. It's really very simple.
That's
Great.
the same at Chrism.
Joshua, do you have anything to add to this question?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's all been covered. I agree with a lot of what Suzanne was saying about harder and harder to come by. Yeah, so I would rather open it up to another question.
Okay, we have reached the time though, so I don't know if we want to be too strict or if we have time for one more question. Jared, what do you think?
One more.
One
Mercy,
more. Okay,
mercy,
good.
Mercy or justice.
Hey.
Mercy or justice.
That's what I like. Okay. Okay, so let me see here. I'm gonna go with this one. This one is from Matthew Gerlich. He says, I would think sacramental practices and contemplative prayer practices best dispose Catholic readers to discover the Catholic imagination in fiction. What do you think about that? So I guess I might rephrase, like, in what ways do, spiritual practices open you up to seeing the Catholic imagination at work?
Do you mind if I answer?
Sure.
Yeah, so I would say, I would approach that by pointing to a book called Christ and Apollo by William F. Lynch, where he addresses it by way of the Ignatian understanding of imagination.
Right.
So, sort of back up a little bit, we could say that there's always been a tension within Christianity around the imagination and what we should allow it to do and how much it can get us in trouble, right? So St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila are very much take us in the apophatic direction of ridding our minds of any images. In fact, in Interior Castle, Teresa of Avila goes so far as to say that even if an image is given to us from God in the highest stages of mystical prayer, we should pretend that we're not even receiving it, or because it could be sent by the devil, and just because it's unreliable. So and I think that that's right a very powerful contemplative path if the end is mystical union. But there's also a more human approach, which is the Ignatian, and that is this idea that, right, when we're reading, let's say, the Peter's denial scene, right, let's really allow our imaginations to present us the way that his voice sounds. A historical realist would immediately object and say, well, no, but we don't know what Peter sounded like. We don't know, we can't speak with the Galilean accent, etc. But the imagination can allow, if it allows us to understand the particulars of, let's say, that scene, right, of Peter's denial, then if we can imaginatively enter into the definite, the sensuous, right, detail, the concrete and the particular of that scene, it's passing through that definiteness and that concreteness and that particular that we can come to understand the gravity and the significance of Peter's denial itself, right? If we have to smell the charcoal first, we have to realize that when Christ was born, that right next to him this cow was taking a crap, and the imagination is what allows us to know that, right? It's not immediately evident if our imaginations are overly restricted or limited or not, or under exercised.
I would say that no matter what you're called to do in life, you have to view it especially if you're doing it in the name of your faith, you have to do it as a calling. And so the only way to know is through prayer and discernment, whether this is really what you're calling. Are you called to tell this story? And it's really that simple. But the only way to know the answer to that is to pray.
I think that's right. And if I could just say one other thing real quick, because it reminds me of, Vivian had mentioned that Father Elijah was the first novel that Ignatius published by Michael O'Brien. And I love Michael O'Brien. He's a good friend of mine. I don't always love his novels, but I do know that he prayed in the Eucharistic Adoration Chapel every day while he was working on Father Elijah, and he attributes its success to that. And I also know that there's a way in which even if artistically, I don't think that he succeeds on the level of Tolstoy all the time. There have been times where I've been moved almost to prayer through reading some of his novels, and that's not an experience that I oftentimes have with some of my favorite novels. And I would also then just close by saying, with regards to this question of contemplation, right? I think that we as workers in the vineyard of the word, capital W, we love the word. But sometimes we can over exaggerate the importance of words. And Raisa Maritain has this beautiful essay where she says that the end of the poet, right, so the poet sort of is looking around and contemplating and soaking and drenching up this world that they've fallen in love with. And they fall in love with it, as Joseph Pieper says, only the lover sings. They fall in love with it and they just have to, right, spit it out.
Right.
But the mystic, right, she says, begins with noise and ends by shutting up in silence. And so I think that especially for those of us who spend a lot of our time being wordy and voluminous, that contemplative prayer where we are doing nothing but closing our mouths and listening to God is essential.
Well, and it's a meditation on beauty, and beauty is the world. I mean, God made it. The only thing that mars beauty is sin, but in a character such as the whiskey priest and the power and the glory, that even in and of itself, his sin is beautiful in a mysterious way. And the thing is that, faith is a mystery. It's not, dogma sort of is like the tabernacle that keeps mystery safe, if you like. But a lot of what the writer does, the artist does, is to sort of meditate on the mystery of the world. And so prayer, yes, and the Ignatian practices, it's that effort of the imagination, that reaching outward from the self to the other, which is very much like the sort of creative process, that movement from self to other. And unfortunately, we live in an age where the movement is the other way around. It's from the other to the self. It's but the more windows we can look through, with a Catholic imagination, as writers and artists, the better, because most of the world looks in the mirror, right?
I think that
sees the self.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful note to end on, actually. So I want to thank everybody. First of all, our panelists, Collegium, all our co-sponsors, for making this possible. I know that I've been greatly enriched by this conversation, so thank you all so much.
Thank you.
As we head out, I just want to give everybody a couple of announcements, a couple of events to watch out for that are coming up. So Collegium and Dappled Things are excited about announcing, first of all, our online panel on May 24th titled Literature for a Wounded World, Faith and Fiction in the 21st Century. An event with novelist Chris Beja, Kristen Valdez-Quaid, and Randy Boyagoda that's going to be moderated by Dappled Things editor-in-chief, Katie Carl. So that looks fantastic. And then
Yeah.
to follow that up, we're going to have a paid seminar on Claude McKay this June titled After This Our Exile, Search and Diaspora in Claude McKay's Romans in Marseille. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you can make it to some of these events.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.